Okay, every pony, let me just say this. I'm recording the Equestria Daily version of, well, Through the Eyes of Another Pony now. Don't be surprised that this is actually chapter 7, because I discovered when I looked into it that the Equestria Daily version has another pacing and events happen in, well, another order sometimes, I think, or are vastly different from the version on Film Fiction, which is why I reread chapter 7 here, because, well, it has all this, like in the chapter 7 I have already on my channel, all this stuff with Trixie and stuff, but there are also other things, and, well, I guess I'll just have to record it and be done with it. Okay, hope you enjoy. Visual Pony. Through the Eyes of Another Pony. Chapter 7. The part where he chapters you. "The great and powerful Trixie demands to be released at once!" she shouted angrily, squirming away from me. "I'm your biggest fan!" I cried, practically purring in happiness. I could feel Stoic kicking and screaming for control, but Laughter was just not having it. He was in the zone. "Can I have your autograph? The great—" What? That caught her off guard by a huge margin, I could tell. "The great and powerful Trixie is flattered. Now let go of the great and powerful Trixie." "You won't run away if I do, right?" Maybe this matters to everyone/pony. Maybe not, but Trixie's cowl is made of silk. That's right, I know these things. You jelly? You so are. "The great and powerful Trixie fears nothing," she proclaimed haughtily. "She would never run from anything, much less from an over-enthusiastic admirer." I immediately let go of her and sat back on my haunches, pulling out Twilight's letter to Celestia and turning it over to show Trixie the blank backside. "Make it out to Firewall. Also, there's a guy that runs the websites where I come from. He's a huge fan too. His name is "The great and powerful Trixie does not have time for this," she interrupted me loudly, waving me off. "She is on an important mission, one of conquest." But my happy was almost instantly lost. But Trixie tried to stare at me with apathy, but I could tell she was losing her nerve. I can do a seriously convincing puppy dog stare when I have to. She grimaced for a moment before sighing with an eye roll. "Well, if you're going to pout—" I held up the paper, my face still downtrodden and miserable seeming. "To Fireball with love, the great and powerful Trixie." She rambled on, as a magical quill appeared and began scribbling. She then cast a second spell that put her autograph onto the paper and even gave it a kiss. OMG ponies. "There, now shoo, my eager fanatic pony." "But my name is I started to protest. "I said shoo!" She swatted at me with a hoof. I scampered back to Celestia and Stormwing with the letter in my mouth, looking utterly thrilled with myself. Celestia was of the mind that I had lost my sanity, judging by the way she was staring at me. Stormwing looked as though he was contemplating the contents of the last stack of hay he had eaten. Either way, they didn't seem entirely pleased that I had just showed love and attention to Canterlot's latest and greatest attacker. "What's wrong with you?" Stormwing was quite direct about it. "You're just jealous." I stuck my tongue out at him and put the letter back. "I've got both Twilight and Trixie's signature. Bam!" "Enough of that nonsense, Firewall. This is no time to act childish," Celestia ordered quite curtly. My ears drooped a bit as I realized just how bad that looked. Laughter ran a little too freely there, I'm definitely willing to admit. Stoic gave him a slap and quickly took the reins, causing me to serious up rather quickly. "Sorry about that, guys," I murmured with a nod. I lost my head for a moment. "The great and powerful Trixie demands your surrender, Celestia," she ordered, stamping her hoof. "Save Canterlot and Equestria the trouble and damage your refusal would cause. We will not be deterred." "I would know who you are and who you represent. If you've come to parley a surrender, then I would like to know what you plan to do with my beloved Equestria once in control." Celestia sounded as serious as a heart attack. I couldn't believe my pointy ears.
"Princess?"
Stormwing looked dumbfounded, though he really wasn't looking per se. "No, I'm not going to stop making these jokes." "What are you talking about, I started to ask, tilting my head in total shock. "Silence, both of you," she snapped at us before looking back at Trixie. "Well?" Trixie obviously did not expect Celestia to choose mediation over resistance. Her eyes betrayed confusion for several seconds before she finally shook herself out of it. "If you wish to discuss terms, then you must come with the great and powerful Trixie," she stated with a flare of her cowl. "Alone." "I'm sorry, I must keep in mind that terms may be non-negotiable, depending on certain demands made, great and powerful Trixie. If I am to discuss them, then I must bring adequate protection, and as must you, and the party you represent," Celestia explained quite plainly yet politely. "I will, however, ask where you have us meet for such negotiations. Since you are the confronting party, it is only fitting you choose this place, don't you think?" "We're not actually supposed to negotiate. Why aren't you resisting?" She stamped angrily, not expecting this sort of reception at all. After getting the angry out of her system, she sighed. "Very well. I will send a messenger after I have chosen a location. Be grateful that you were spared from the wrath of the great and powerful Trixie!" She reared up and slammed her hoofs down, causing a puff of smoke to shoot up and obscure her. For a moment I thought she was going to run out of the room, but surprisingly enough she did vanish in the cloud. She's obviously been practicing. That's my Trixie. "We haven't much time," Celestia said after a few seconds of silence. "Captain Stormwing, gather the Sky Archons and get them suited. Have them scour the city for the next hour for anything suspicious."
"Is that all, my princess?"
he asked instantly, his entire body tensing with anticipation. "No, get Firewall here some armor," she replied, giving a nod at the roof as she cast a spell to repair the entire thing in mere seconds. I think our reactions were polar opposite. Mine involved a surge of heart rate, big happy eyes, and a grin that threatened to go all the way around my head. Stormwing's was one of absolute shock and terror.
"Princess, are you certain that's a good idea?"
He started to call out to her as she began to leave. "Second-guessing me, Captain?" She looked back at him over her shoulder.
Not at all, my princess."
He quickly stammered out his reply, blushing brightly and bowing low.
"Forgive me."
"One day, Captain, you'll learn that I value your input." She gave a sweet chuckle before cantering on. He didn't seem to get the hint, so I helped him with a clop on the back of his head, because I'm an awesome friend like that. "Finally hit that sorry bastard!"
"What the—"
He turned to face me, snorting loudly.
"You've got mere seconds to explain before I whip the cutie mark off your flank."
Damn, I love a good line. I knew right away I would steal and abuse the hell out of it. "She's trying to tell you something, moron," I replied, shaking my head in pity.
"I said explain yourself, not give me some cryptic fertilizer."
His mane flared from the energy coursing through him. Some pony did not like being hit. I found this amusing. Indeed, I would have twisted my evil mustache if I had one. Where was Stephen Magnet when you needed him? "I'd write it out for you in a 3-paragraph essay with footnotes, but you can't read. Instead, I'm going to spell it out for you because you're obviously blind in more ways than one." I sighed in exasperation. "She's trying to let you know that it's okay to second-guess her if you feel it's for the best, Jack Pony. Pick up the subtext. She's obviously not the warrior that you are, so she relies on your input as one of her greatest military minds. I mean, how long have you been doing this anyway?"
"A little less than a millennium,"
he responded, his expression a tad confused.
"Holy crap, you're old!"
I exclaimed, suddenly putting on a charade of care and laying a hoof on his shoulder. Do I need to get you a walker or something? I hear Granny Smith has spares.
Shut up. It's time to suit up, rookie.
He snapped back, hoofing me in the face before grabbing my mane in his mouth and yanking me along. I suppose I should be grateful he didn't taser hoof me, which is still the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. The silliest thing about this, though, is if you visualize the size difference. Like I said before, I'm about Big Mac size, and Stormwing is probably just a hair taller than Rainbow Dash, so it was like watching a little Asian martial arts master yank along a 7-foot-tall Viking by his hair. "My precious delicate locks of silk!" I dramatically cried out, chuckling as he yanked me along. Yeah, manes are pretty tough, so it didn't really hurt, which certainly made resisting easier and more enjoyable.
"Fud up!"
I heard him snarl through the mouth of mane. He dragged me halfway there before becoming irritated with my struggles and spitting my mane out, allowing me to just walk with. I chuckled and stopped giving him hell for the moment, cantering along in silence. The military wing on the east side of the castle was actually very plain, which was no big surprise. It was just a stadium-esque building with several dozen openings surrounding it. Pegasus Pony Lounge Base. Brilliant! I wondered just how many military branches and leaders there were, and began to ask that very question before I was interrupted by the zappy little pony.
"Do you really think Celestia were—" he started to ask.
"Yes," I cut him off, rolling my eyes, "and I can't believe you are too stupid to notice."
I just never considered the possibility,"
he admitted, his ears drooping a bit. It pains me to say this, but it was actually kind of adorable. In fact, Storming just looked downright cute with his armor off, even if he had a perpetual bad hair day going on. Also, fair warning for any pony that takes that out of context. Beating's everlasting. Okay? Well, glad to have been of any help, Tiny. I chuckled before entering the building and walking into the open atrium in the center. So, where is every pony?
"Sky Archons!"
The voice that came out of that pony beside me was incredibly loud. Stormwing apparently had quite the set of lungs.
"At attention!"
It was like watching a light show, as about 24 ponies of assorted colors and sizes bolted into a straight line in front of the two of us. They were paired oddly enough, with one pony standing more to the front and their pair standing somewhat back and to the left. Well, my right, their left. Whatever, like it matters. What was odd to me was that Silverheart was amongst them and she didn't seem to have a partner. You remember her, right? Scary as hell glare? Gets knocked over like a stormtrooper?
"New orders from the princess," he announced. "Starlight, you and Hotshot are to take teams 3 through 7 and scour the city. We've had an invasion threat, and while we are not under martial law, we are to remain vigilant. You are to suit up and depart 5 minutes ago. Consider yourself already dismissed and testing my patience."
"Aye, Captain." One of the female Pegasi, navy blue with a black mane and gold eyes, yelled out her affirmation. "Teams 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Armor on, wings open. Rendezvous at the north gate for further orders." It was cool. It was very cool. I resisted the attempt to squee from sheer awesome poniness.
"The rest of you, get your gear and grab a meal on the flight. You're to remain on standby here at the palace and are to await orders from us via magical mail. If so much as a pebble is missing from this palace when I get back, you get to guard the moon for the next 1,000 years. Horizon, you're in charge. Silverheart, you are to wait here for further orders," he said with a nod, turning his head their way after a moment of silence. "That means now, Phyllis."
Zoom, they all took flight. The entire scene was like watching a rainbow jump off the ground, each color splitting off and going its own way. Fully awesome. I looked at Stormwing with an appreciative nod. "Extremely impressive," I said, smirking with excitement. "No wonder Equestria is so safe."
"I'd never tell them this to their faces, but they're the best flyers a pony could ask for,"
he murmured, a bit of a smile creeping at the edges of his muzzle.
He then turned to the last remaining pony and nodded. "Lieutenant Silverheart, Firedoll here needs some armor, as per the princess's request. See to that. Also, he will have no idea about putting it on, so you will act as his artillery. Report to me as soon as you're finished."
"Aye, sir," she answered, flapping over and standing beside me. "This way, sir." It took me a moment to register that she was talking to me. I gave my head a shake, as if to wake myself up before nodding at her. "Please, don't call me sir. I'm not a soldier."
"You are today,"
Stormwing said with a chuckle, sparking my haunch with a flick of his tail just before taking off.
"Ugh, you son of a—"
I turned and spat fire at him as he laughed, flying faster than my flames could travel. He won that round, but I would get him one day. And there would be a great wailing and gnashing of pony teeth on that day. "Wow, I've never seen him so happy." Silverheart blinked, watching Stormwing soar away towards his quarters. "Yeah, well, if it were up to me, I'd thrash the happy right out of him," I grumped before looking at Silverheart with a sigh. "So you're a Sky Archon, huh? Not to gloat, but that kinda makes me feel good, seeing as how I kinda ran you over that one day. Sorry about that, by the way." "Don't let it go to your head. I'm not a Sword Archon, I'm an Artillery Archon." She nodded before walking along. "Please, let's go. He doesn't like to wait." "Yeah, but I've suddenly become afflicted with a split hoof, so we're going to have to take our time." I lied so obviously that even she couldn't resist snickering. "Such a shame, don't you think?" "Oh yes," she confirmed, shaking her head mirthfully. "A tragedy." "So what's the difference between Artillery Archons and Sword Archons?" I asked, crackling my neck with a grunt before pulling out a cigarette and lighting up. I was suddenly struck with a horrible realization. Damn it, I left my pancakes in Luna's room. I blame you. I could have had an unhealthy amount of butter in my system right now. "The horrors of the day pile up, it seems," she said with a nod. "I'll have to console myself with a glass of milk right before bedtime just to get to sleep." Sarcasm strikes again, much to my bittersweet pleasure. Why was it that none of these awesome ponies were in the show? Luna alone would have tripled the viewership, but no. She has to wait for season 2. Hasbrony, I are disappoint. Anyway, the difference between the two is that Artillery Archons focus more on their weather magic and roles of utility, while the Sword Archons' attention is directed more towards direct combat and physical perfection, she explained. As Stormwing is the captain of the Sky Archons, it's his duty to be adept in both fields. "You, madame, have just blown my mind," I nodded with a smirk, starting to put it together. "So I'm to assume that the teams are one of each?" "Indeed. Artillery Archons can provide a lot of support to a Sword Archon, making them much more effective than a hoof full of just one type." She further elaborated as she led me towards the armory. She didn't have to lead me technically, thanks to the magical map, but I have trouble walking, taking and referencing that memory at the same time, so what if I'm not a multitasker? One team can fight off a Hydra, and a couple of teams is more than a match for a dragon even. And here I thought that ponies weren't that dangerous, I commented before looking over all the armor. It was like being in a candy shop, only less tasty and more awesome. They had chain, plate, gilded, banded, full, field, and even some scale mail. Though I'm positively certain that the scales were artificial. "Wow," I commented with a whistle. "You know how hard it is to do that with a cigarette in your mouth? Amazingly difficult. I'm just so talented, I can't stand myself sometimes." "There's more metal in this room than A7X concert at Ozfest. Daddy likes." "Yeah, most of this is actually too small for your large frame. Eat less, human," she remarked with a poke to my side as her silver eyes roamed over the numerous armor sets. "No, I'm not a pudgy pony. That would be funny, though." "No, you ponies get bigger," I demanded, still gazing at the armors. "Here," she pointed out a plate set of one of the largest racks in the back. It's the only one close enough to your size. Hopefully Stormwing won't bludgeon you the moment he finds out you're wearing it." It was pretty damned cool. It was silver with gold trim and flared most of the edges. It took a moment for the last comment to register. Fairly certain I had a glazed-over expression for a few seconds there. "Wait, what?" Stoic was quick to beat laughter back down. "Why would Stormwing get mad?" "Because the last pony to wear this was his father, the first Sky Archon," Silverheart replied as she grabbed the first piece with her mouth and walked my way, gesturing me to lift a hoof to fit one of the first Sabatons. "His name was Winter Sky, big legend, to the Sky Archons at least." The entire process took several minutes, the longest step being the tying of my mane. Apparently you have to tie it as tightly as possible to fit it through the helmet before untying it and stylizing it in as a typical equestrian soldier, which was practically ripping off the Trojan mohawk. The entire time I was very apprehensive of the fact that I would eventually have to face a Stormwing in his father's armor. Let us say I expected there to be some flying sparks. Badoosh! "You're pretty still. Usually Archons get fidgety after the first 5 minutes," she said with a nod, fastening the last buckle on my back. "Yeah, anything that touches my hair chills me out," I said with a smirk before looking at her and flicking my cigarette. "How do I look?" "Like a wingless Sky Archon," she said with a chuckle. "And a cute one at that. Luna would blush." I got a chill all over, grimacing a bit. "Wrong thing to say?" she asked, a bit surprised. "It's nothing against Luna, really. It's just I don't know anything about anything," I said with a sigh. "She's awesome, but what if I can't stay? What if I simply have to choose one or the other? I mean, I love it here, but am I supposed to just never go home to see my family and friends? I have people that rely on me back home. What if I can—" "Okay, I get it. You're just being cautious." She rolled her eyes, waving a hoof to cut me off. Celestia's tears. If I wanted to study in psychology, I'd have gone to the librarium rather than the military. "Sorry," I nervously kicked at the floor. I know I act stupid, but I'm constantly thinking about everything. Trust me, it shows. Celestia and Stormwing wouldn't let you near them if they thought you were an idiot," she reasoned pointedly, turning for the door. "So obviously they don't, despite how dumb you can get at times." "You're about as warm and fuzzy as a room-temperature caltrop," I said with a laugh, smirking at her as she left. "And here I was trying to be so nice," she chuckled as she cantered out, calling back, "Mirror is in the room to your left." You know what was rather peculiar? I had not seen myself in a mirror at all. I had been nearly, 4-5 days as a pony? And I still had not taken a look at my face. What that said about me, I have no clue, really. I slipped into what looked like a break room for whatever pony slaved away hammering out these amazing pony bathing suits. Sure enough, there was a small mirror, no bigger than a medicine cabinet mirror you would see in a bathroom. My eyes were green, as they had always been, unsurprisingly. I really just looked like a more excited ash-gray big Macintosh, with a horn 2 shades darker coming out of my head. It wasn't me I was paying attention to, though. It was the armor. It was just a hair loose, not much. There had been holes for wings, but she had covered them up with matching plates. All in all, it felt strangely light, which made sense after I had considered it for a moment. Pegasi needed to be able to fly fast, and if added protection slowed you down too much, then what was the point? Regardless, it was more than obvious that some pony had poured their heart into every last detail, as it was meticulous. Descriptions, I don't like giving them unless they have meaning. This armor had meaning, not because I was wearing it, but it belonged to a pony before me that was obviously a hero. Celestia had thought highly enough of this colt to create a branch of military just for him, and those that followed in his hoofsteps. I sometimes get confused seeing as how hoof replaces any hand or foot compound words. and he had obviously inspired Stormwing to take up a similar calling. What I'm getting at is that this armor deserved a bit of notoriety. Looking good, if I may say so. At least I didn't collapse in pain this go-around. That was nice, I admit. So you can see me? It was time to be deductive. Asking questions the right way can get you information. Lots of it. You just have to know how to ask harmlessly things that get you somewhere, no matter the answer. Oh dear, I let that slip, I suppose. Setting them off guard helps, though it didn't seem overly worried. Yeah, I suppose you did. So who are you? Be direct. I told you I cannot remember my original name, and get nowhere apparently. Convenient? No, actually it's downright frustrating, if you want my honest opinion. Bitter subject. Thank you for noticing. My pleasure. Now, I'm sorta busy. I can't chat it up for idle reasoning here. Also, what do I call you? Call me an observer. Not entirely unlike you when you watch this world. So, you're a brony? No, this is actually a warning that I'm delivering. A trap is being laid for Celestia. Try as he might, he was giving away more than he intended. The fact that he knew what a brony was, and was able to deny such affiliations, told me plenty. He had seen other worlds, and he wasn't necessarily from neither Earth nor Equestria. You mean at this charade of a negotiation? Yeah, I know, so does she. Then stop her. She's a big girl, she can make her own decisions. And if she's wrong, then we're all going to look pretty stupid, but I figured out how to handle that sensation a long time ago. I have no problems believing that. Do you want me to throw a caramel dancin'? Whatever that is, it does sound rather awful. You'll rue the day, I promise. At least make certain she's aware. Whatever. Why do you care? Why do you care? I love it here. What's your excuse? I like ponies. Don't you try and out-nonsense me, son. Therein lies the path towards insanity immeasurable. I have no problems believing that. Good. Was that all you wanted to talk about? I recognize your armor. Oh, do tell. It once belonged to a great hero, I heard this about 1,000 times in 100 different ways. I tried hitting the start button, but then I remembered this was a reality and he was being serious, which was lame. No, really, skip the cryptic introduction. Very well. He was a grey-maned white Pegasus who played an integral role in defeating Nightmare Moon and sealing away the dark otherworldly magics that brought about its creation. Wah! The stories say nothing about a Pegasus. It just says Celestia won the battle. Celestia hides certain tragedies from the masses. The hero known as Winter Sky died, sacrificing himself to banish Nightmare Moon. His selfless act gave Celestia the time and power she needed to use the elements of harmony, as well as disable the source of the esoteric magics that created the nightmare itself. Now I seriously doubt your credibility. You're telling me that not only did a pony die in this utopia, but that Celestia lied to cover up such an awful event? Doubt if you like. Celestia knows much more than she lets on. It's how she has survived and ruled so efficiently for so long. Why do you think she took on the first pony in 1,000 years with the strength to challenge her as a protégé? She may have kind tendencies, but it was Twilight's power that frightened the Alicorn into taking her in. Perhaps I am making a grand assumption, though, for I have no proof. I'm not the kind of guy that simply gets mad when he hears something that he doesn't like, but, you're starting to anger me. Please realize that you're no evidence or reasons for me to believe you. Ask Stormwing about his father and why he became a Sky Archon. Fine, and weren't you going to tell me where to find you eventually? On an entirely unrelated note, I would bet that it would really hurt if I bucked some pony while wearing this armor. Thoughts on the matter? Oh dear, I'm all out of time. Yeah, I bet you are. Just as our conversation ended, Stormwing skidded into the room, stopping just in front of me.
Firewall, Trixie already contacted Celestia. We are to meet her at the council room at the ruins of the castle of the Royal Pony Sisters.
That name is ridiculously long. All right, I guess it's time to rock. Stormwing, I hope you don't mind the armor. I coughed a little uncomfortable.
Why would you say that? He tilted his head, arching an eyebrow. As long as you don't ruin it, I don't see there being a problem.
Derp, Stormwing can't see. It's probably just sense or whatever. Seemed like another set of armor to him. Oh, it's nothing, I admitted with an inward sigh of relief. Let's motor.
Motor?
He asked before I interrupted him. Forget it, lead the way, I cried out.
Seriously, that armor isn't easy to make. Don't ruin it,
he ordered as he turned around and cantered out of the armory into a takeoff. The bastard made me chase him the entire way, and to put things bluntly, that irked me. So screw Captain Stormwing, every pony. We ran back through the ballroom of the royal palace, and I considered stopping to grab my pancakes, but that would have been rather inconsiderate to upset Luna's sleep just for pancakes. She had better eat them when she wakes up, I told myself. I hated wasting, one of the qualities that my dad had beat into my sick skull. When we came back outside to the courtyard, I saw Twilight and Celestia happily chatting it up with one another. I had almost forgotten that Twilight was even here. Hey, cool. Is Twilight coming with? I asked as I cantered up, sweating and panting a bit from the run. Hello, Firewall. And I think it's best to take no risks, Celestia answered, causing both Twilight and I to show looks of equal disappointment. But, Princess, I might be able to help, she humbly pointed out. I don't want to endanger you on a mite, my dear, Celestia countered, shaking her head. I could tell she wasn't entirely committed to the idea, though. How? Let me put it this way. When Celestia has made a decision, you will know whether or not the conversation is over. Trust me, it's like this gut-wrenching feeling that tells you arguing could send you to the moon for 1,000 years or something. But that wasn't the case here. She was just being overprotective of Twilight. Better to have a pony and not need her, I said very seriously, somehow able to hold a straight face, than to need a pony and not have her. Wow, that's profound. Twilight tilted her head. Did you come up with it on your own? Sure did. I lied so hard that I couldn't help but chuckle. No, I totally robbed that line from Earth. I just ponified it. Is that an actual word in your world? Silverheart asked as she approached from behind me. Oh, it's the lukewarm caltrop, I exclaimed happily. I went to give her a hug, but she just stiff-hoofed me right in the face. Celestia laughed at me for a moment before sighing in resignation and looking down at a hopeful purple pony face. After several seconds of silence, she shook her head. Do I have your word that you will remain safe? Cross my heart, hope to fly, stick a cupcake in my eye, Twilight swore eagerly, remembering to close her damn eye before shoving her hoof into it. I couldn't help but do the motions right along with her, which brought about even more laughter from every pony, except for Stormwing, who was tilting his head as though he were trying to figure out what species we were really.
I think his crazy is starting to affect the other ponies, he said with a serious nod. I vote we lock him up and throw away the key. I volunteer to take on this heavy burden.
Thank you, but I don't think that will be necessary, Stormwing, she said with a laugh before letting it trail off and regaining a modicum of seriousness. We're leaving soon. Stormwing, Silverheart, I want you to stay with me while the rest of the Sky Archons protect the city. I've sent the equestrian guard to our borders, as we know nothing about our enemy. Stormwing and Silverheart both gave a nod, acknowledging their orders. Firewall, I can't help but feel this has something to do with you, she admitted, taking a somewhat apologetic stance on her confession. I've been debating on whether or not I should leave you here. Well, not to exclude the possibility, but everything can't always be about me, right? I asked hopefully, not believing my own words. Unless you have a reason to think it does? No, just a feeling, which is why you're coming with us. That way I can find out for certain if it's true, she responded. I think she was trying to do more convincing of herself than she was of me. Okay, good. Would you have a silly if I had gotten all dressed up for nothing? I gave a laugh, smirking happily. In Winter Sky's old armor, no less. I'm not surprised, actually. He was the only Sky Archon that could compare to you in terms of size." She gave her nod of approval. Stormwing looked as though he'd been kicked in the head as the revelation set in. "Please deliver my orders, Captain. We'll be off as soon as you return," she commanded, gently blinking when Stormwing didn't instantly obey. "Captain?" Silverheart looked over at him, facing my general direction, seemingly zoned out. Before any pony could say anything, she gave him a kick to the hindquarters to jerk him out of his conflicted stupor. I wasn't so sure that it was a good idea for me to have been wearing his old man's armor.
"Oh!" He snapped out of his freeze daze, still facing me as he gave a nod. "Oh, of course, right away, Your Majesty." With that, Silverheart and Stormwing took off. Celestia sighed wistfully and glanced my way. "Please, do not take it the wrong way, Firewall. I do not believe he disapproved, but was merely unprepared." "Dude, he has every right to be freaking out," I said in all seriousness. Then I realized I had called Celestia a dude and choked down an urge to burst out laughing at myself. By the way, every pony, that is the secret of lifelong happiness. Do not take yourself seriously. The less pride and arrogance you have, and the less you fear the public's eye on you, the more you'll enjoy life. Cross my heart, hope to... Yeah, you know where I'm going with this. Stormwing and Silverheart returned with a pair of loud thunderclaps announcing their arrival. Twilight and I nearly jumped out of our skins, while Celestia rubbed at one of her ears with a slight grimace. "We've done as you ordered, Your Majesty," he announced, bowing in mid-air to her, Silverheart following suit. "We are prepared to leave."
"Thank you, Stormwing, Silverheart. Please continue to work on less deafening arrivals," she responded with a smile before whistling as though calling a horse. Rather than a horse, we got the awesome sky carriage of awesomeness again. I was instantly thrilled. I hopped right on and grinned madly at every pony, already ready to get in the air. I think my tail was wagging even. Best thing about flying hundreds of feet off the ground? No bugs. Bugs suck. I wonder how many bugs Rainbow Dash has eaten flying low to the ground. "Some ponies excited," Twilight commented before boarding as well, Celestia moving in between us. "Yeah," I agreed, tapping my front two hooves in alternation to portray it a little more. We all took our seats, and without another moment wasted, we were off. I lit up as I usually did in transit, still polite enough to keep my smoke and ashes on the outside. My mind began to wander around as we moved through the sky, going right back to the place that we had been to yesterday. I nearly zoned out before suddenly remembering the voice that had tried to warn me. It was then I looked at Celestia and gave her a gentle poke of my hoof to garner her attention. Celestia seemed surprised. Apparently, being a princess, most ponies don't just poke her. I had to chuckle a bit, realizing that I was just too comfortable around every pony, that I'd yet to act with any propriety around them, princesses included. "So you know this is probably a trap, right?" I pointed out to her. "I mean, I've complete faith that you know what you're doing. I'm just curious as to what you have in mind." "I plan to negotiate to the best of my ability," she answered in all seriousness. "If proper terms can be met for good and proper reasons, then I would avoid any unnecessary violence." I tilted my head a bit before shrugging, entirely okay with that explanation. As I said, I had every bit of faith in Celestia. She obviously knew more than I did, and has been spending a very, very long time as a monarch of a thriving, beautiful world. What more did one need to hear before they would be convinced? I finally found out why it took less than an hour to get to the RCRPS. Much easier to say than ruins of the castle of the Royal Pony Sisters. Because it wasn't far from Canterlot at all. In fact, after a bit of looking around, I discovered that I had flown over the damn thing on my way to Ponyville to get a pony that would lead me through the forest. Casually observant of my surroundings, I am not. We touched down in the ruined atrium just outside the central building and disembarked from the carriage, which flew off into the sky all on its own. I bet Celestia has no problems finding a parking space with a ride like that. I jelly. Are we the first ones here? I asked, looking around to see no pony but us. They're either not here yet, or perhaps they are already in the council room, Celestia readily supplied as she made her way towards the central building. Or they are lying in wait to ambush us. That's always an option, Silverheart said in a matter-of-fact tone. Aren't you cheerful? Twilight laughed a bit as we all followed Celestia inside.
She's about as cheerful as an irritated basilisk. That's why she's my artillery partner. Stormwing acknowledged with a smirk as we entered into the council room, which was actually still in decent shape despite its age. It was a large dome building with a long rectangular table in its center and an entrance at every compass point. There were spots specifically shaped to hold cushions for ponies to sit on, and though there were no cushions at the time, having a pair of powerful magical ponies makes that an easy overcome obstacle. After all the table spaces were properly cushioned, we all took our seats. For those of you who must know, the order from left to right was Silverheart, Celestia, Stormwing, me, and Twilight, getting bored of descriptions. So, how long will we have to wait? I asked, getting fidgety after the first minutes. Not at all, my silly admirer. I heard Trixie's voice and instantly perked up with a huge smile as she appeared along the other side of the table with an arrogant smile. Trixie! The great and powerful Trixie, she stated firmly, crossing her hoofs and holding her head up proudly before noticing the pony sitting beside me. You! The second-rate unicorn that tried to show me up back in that backwater hamlet! Twilight rolled her eyes before glaring right back, suddenly not so happy she had come along after all. I could tell she was biting her tongue. She and Trixie didn't get along. People like all these Trixie ships, and while there may have been a flank load of tension between the two of them, there was not a damn thing romantic about it. I felt like I was going to catch fire and explode twice from being on the sidelines of those two glares. That was when we heard the hoofsteps of an incoming pony. They were loud, as in heavy loud. As they got closer, they became even louder, and out of the north entrance behind Trixie came the largest pony I had ever seen. He looked like a grey version of Big Mac, only slightly bigger and more muscular. He wore black plate and chainmail armor and a helmet that covered his head and mane completely, showing only a pair of blue glowing eyes. Quite possibly the most uncuddly-looking pony to have ever existed. His wings were also quite large, indeed they were nearly the size of Celestia's. In fact, I'm pretty sure he could break an arm with those wings. Nothing about this pony said, "Oh, hey kids, let's have a peaceful negotiations and then skip home as we hold hands," but rather screamed something along the sidelines of, "There will be beatings, and they will involve you and those you love." He looks like he could eat you in one gulp, I whispered to Twilight, who snickered despite herself. Are you a Zurflora? Silverheart asked, smirking a bit. Because if you are, I'm going to need to leave the room. Of course that's not a Zurflora, you fool! Trixie snapped irritably as a second set of hoofsteps belied a second pony entering, these much more soft. That's when we saw the villainous Azurflora. If I had been taking a drink of tea or something, I would have spewed it everywhere with a double take. My jaw almost fell off as I looked at our so-called conqueror. I was not impressed, or rather I was, but more by just how non-threatening she looked. She was just a hair shorter than Trixie, and a whole lot less intimidating in terms of hostile demeanor. In fact, she was downright timid. She was an earth pony with a white coat and a royal blue tail and mane. She looked about as fierce as Fluttershy, in all honesty. Even her brown saddlebags looked like a couple of dainty young woman purses. You're kidding, I murmured over to Stormwing as both Azurflora and her bodyguard— Buddy pony? Pony guard? You get the idea. As the two of them walked towards their seats beside Trixie, just across from us. That's Azurflora. I guess we'd be screwed if this were a cuddling competition. Where? Stormwing's visage was one of confusion. All I sense is Trixie and that big guard pony.
Celestia, Twilight, and myself all looked at him as though he were blind. Okay, yeah, I went too far on that one. No, I didn't. You can't see her? Celestia asked softly, arching an eyebrow. The visible one, naturally. Yes, I know it's not always hidden, but she spends enough time using one eye that she has to be able to function without depth perception. She's standing right next to Trixie, Captain, Silverheart informed him. You can't sense her?
No, he shook his head. I see nothing but those two.
Technically, you don't see I started to point out, before having to adeptly dodging Twilight's rebuking hoof. Ha! Firewall, you cannot act naturally during grave matters, then I will send you back to the castle. Celestia warned, not in the mood for shenanigans. Yes, I'm sorry, I sighed, reminding myself that this situation wasn't a joke. I shook my head and began wondering what could keep Azure Flora hidden from Stormwing. I am surprised you had the nerve to show yourselves, Trixie chortled pridefully as she interrupted our hushed dialogue. Please, Trixie, don't antagonize them, Azure Flora gently commanded, her voice gentle and pleading. Very well. My apologies. Trixie looked as though she were going to be sick, having forced herself into an apology. Let us begin. Agreed. Celestia agreed agreeably. I agree, that was an excess of agreement. As we all sat up and paid attention. I'm glad you're willing to negotiate peacefully. I am Princess Celestia, ruler of Equestria. I am Azure Flora, nothing more, she replied humbly. Forgive the impunity, Princess, but Equestria is in danger from a lurking threat. At first I thought this threat was merely attempting to sabotage the royal family from within, but certain sources have led me to believe that the threat is unknown even to the source itself. I see. Celestia nodded, taking Flora's words very seriously. And where did you learn of this threat? I've seen it before, she murmured, looking down. This is not the first time this has happened, and I think you know already, Your Highness. Suppose that I don't, Celestia countered, her visage fading into slight confusion. How would you convince me of this threat? Your Majesty, there is no proof I could offer. That is why I was preparing to fight for this cause. I cannot let history repeat itself. She looked back up at all of us, having steeled herself in determination. I will not fail. What is this history? I asked, listening very closely. She flinched, visibly, and we all noticed. She then looked at me and frowned sadly. You are not the first human to have come to Equestria. Dun dun dun! Yeah, that sound didn't actually play, but if it had, no one would have been surprised. I looked at the others in shock, gauging their reactions. Stormwing seemed contemplative, though Twilight was more so. Celestia certainly looked as shocked as I felt, actually having leaned back a bit. How do you know what a human is? Twilight spoke up, quick to wrangle details out of her. As I said, the one you've named Firewall, he's not the first, she repeated herself. I was quite familiar with the first one.
How do you know his name? Stormwing looked in her general direction.
I'm adept at gathering information. I would rather not reveal my methods, should this yield unfavorable results, she admitted, nodding an apology. What human came before me? I asked, staring hard. I do not know his name, she shook her head. I was simply one of the innocents caught in the chaos he caused. The last human to have visited Equestria vanished 1,000 years ago, Celestia announced. That princess just raised the ante on the my mind effing blown factor. You knew the entire time, I gasped. I think this is the very first time in my life I gasped and seriously meant it. Wait, strike that. I gasped when I got a Super Nintendo for Christmas of '93, out loud. I will explain later, she promised, keeping her eye fixed on Azure Flora. I knew I recognized you. I never forget one of my little ponies. You were a gardener back then. Yes, she gave a nod. Wait, you're over 1,000 years old? I pointed an armored hoof at Flora. I am, she confirmed. You were there when Luna turned into Nightmare Moon. Twilight emulated my gasp. I admit hers was cooler. That's what you get when you're competing with O.P. Sparkle, I suppose. Did you see what happened? I did. The two-word answers were getting pretty silly. I almost wanted to ask her something silly, such as if she had ever dressed up in a cold suit or something, just to throw her off, you know. I didn't though. The tension was so thick there you could have cut a chunk out of it and bludgeoned some pony senseless with it. So I was definitely not going to find out just how quickly I could get magicked the hell out of there by shattering the heavy mood.
What happened the day the nightmare was defeated? What happened to Winter Sky, my father? Storming slammed his hoofs on the table. You were there, weren't you?
I was, she nodded, looking to Celestia. Shall I tell him, Princess? All will be explained in time, every pony. Let us conclude this business, and then we will talk at length later. Celestia looked over at him, Storming and Twilight. We all promptly shut the front door. We hushed. Now, Flora, you think that firewall is a danger to us all. Why is that? This. She finally reached into her saddlebags and tossed a fist-sized ball of metal onto the table. Trixie winced initially, becoming more comfortable as it rolled away from her and more towards us. In Manpulon! Twilight gasped, her eyes widening. You were the ones that stole it from the crater. You've given it a name? I always called it anti-magic. See? It's dangerous substance. It can be metal, it can be wood, it can be sand, and it can be liquid, she explained, staring at it with a hint of malice. Whatever the shape or state it is in, it's dangerous. Short-term exposure has random minor effects, is easily cured by bathing with a special formula. Longer-term effects are even more random and can be far more dire. Mine was to lose my mortality. This is a zombie pony? As well as my special talent, which was growing and arranging beautiful flowers in a small shop. I also cannot be affected by magic. That explained why Storming couldn't see her, I suddenly realized. Magic apparently wasn't even able to perceive her. Twilight seemed doubtful, tilting her head. Then why wasn't I affected when I was at the crater? What little there was at the summoning site was small in quantity and thinly dispersed in a large area. You would have had to practically roll in the dirt to have seen any effects, she explained with a nod. Even a normal bath would have been enough to cleanse you. Wait, random effects, a special formula bath? I'd heard that before. That doesn't sound familiar to you, Twilight? Yes, poison joke! Twilight caught the reference instantly. Is this related to it? Yes. Poison joke grows in areas where the substance has resided for a few months, she clarified. Much to the Everfree Forest is where the in Manpulon you called it. Fitting it, I suppose. But yes, the in Manpulon remains of the last human are mostly found around the Everfree Forest. There isn't much left that hasn't eroded into dust, but when enough is gathered in one place, the poison joke begins to grow. The pollen can temporarily carry the same effects as a genuine article, but even those have become less potent. While generally harmless now, it was not always. The horrible truth is that this forest once lived up to its ghastly reputation, and still does in a greatly lessened degree. I'd almost dared to hope that a few more centuries and it would have become completely safe for ponies once again, and it will be, but only if the human goes home. I was flabbergasted. My jaw was in a constant state of being hung wide open. I had that feeling somewhat gnawing at me that me being here was bad. I felt it as soon as I had woken up in the middle of town square. I had run to Twilight to see if it was true or if I had just been paranoid. Yet here it was, an ancient earth pony staring me down, telling me that history was just going to repeat a tragic event, and only because I was just sitting around polluting the air. So, how does it work? I asked, slightly numb all over. What causes me to create this stuff? I don't know. I just know something about you, or perhaps the world you come from stagnates magic," she cried out suddenly, shaking her head in frustration. "What frustrates me the most is how it's inconsistent with you. The crater you left from being summoned here was covered in the substance, yet you've been here for days, and I've not been able to find a single speck elsewhere. But I'm not waiting for more to appear. This castle, or rather what's left of it, is proof enough that even a grand city such as the one that once surrounded the former capital cannot weather the effects of your entropic aura. You have to leave, Firewall, and if you don't, I'll make you leave." I nodded. It made sense, strangely enough. As painful as it was for me to admit, even just the inside. I believed her. Humans just don't belong in Equestria. "So, how do I get home?" I swallowed, idly running a hoof over the table, just to busy some part of me, distracting oneself, if you would. "No, this is nonsense." Twilight gave the floor a stamp of her hoof. "I've done research on the substance, and I have no reason to believe that he is responsible for its creation. I mean, he uses magic, and extremely well for that matter. He's a unicorn, for crying out loud. I don't pretend to understand it. I just know what has happened in the past, and I'm not taking any risks. I've been given the power to fight the corruption, and fight it I will." Her voice was soft, but it was like wrapping a steel bar in a layer of cotton. "I understand your concerns, Azure Flora, and I agree this is indeed a matter that bears investigation," Celestia nodded. Hell, I agreed with her. My being here was incredibly causing enough problems. It wasn't too far off a stretch of imagination to believe that I was the source of the stuff when it only just surfaced the very day I arrived. "It may be already too late, Princess. We must take action now and work towards getting him back to wherever he came from," she pleaded. "I won't banish any pony who has done no wrong just on your word." Celestia shook her head somewhat. "I will, however, ask that you help us by telling us everything you know, so that we may get as much of a head start as possible." Azure Flora shook her head sadly as she listened to Celestia. That wasn't good enough for her, and I could tell by the way she was tensing her body that negotiations were about to end, violently. "And that is why I must wrest control of Equestria from you," she answered, nodding sorrowfully before nodding at Trixie. When Trixie jumped up on the table and pointed her horn at me, I expected something silly. Instead, I got something dangerous, namely a bolt of lightning that I just barely jumped away from in time. "That concludes the negotiations, every pony. Thank you for coming," Silverheart sardonically stated as she and Stormwing turned and bucked the table up and over. I almost laughed, despite myself. I can appreciate a witty line in tight situations. I heard Trixie squeal in shock as she fell back off the table. It didn't fall over them, shockingly enough, having paused at 90 degrees. Frost covered it all over in what seemed like an instant before it shattered like glass. The large Pegasus pony that had been standing by Azure Flora literally froze and shattered that huge stone table like a ceramic plate. Some pony had some cool friends, no pun intended. Twilight's horn began to shimmer, but Azure Flora held her hoof out. That ball of anti-magic metal suddenly warped into a long serpentine shape before wrapping itself around Twilight's neck like a fashion accessory. I suppose we should have been grateful that she didn't try to strangle Twilight, but taking her out of the fight so easily was not instilling great amounts of confidence in us. The big frosty Pegasus made a dash for me, flying like a rocket. He never made it, though, thanks to Stormwing diving into him and using the good old taser hoof. It's much funnier when it's not used on me, I admit. Trixie shot another bolt at me, but Celestia deflected it with a bit of her own magic as Silverheart reared up, flapping her wings and slamming back down to send a gust force that shoved Trixie back, though Flora's hair didn't even get ruffled by the wind. I decided I wasn't going to wait for something else to attack me and began to rush at Flora. She wasn't far away, and thus I was on her in an instant. When her eyes widened and she fell back out of instinct, throwing her hoofs up to protect herself, I lost my nerve. I felt so small when I heard her whimper, and it was like letting the air out of a fight balloon. She was just another little pony having been frightened into action. "Please," I said, frowning at her. "Just come with us. We can work this out. I don't want to hurt any pony." For a moment she looked as though she would comply, but after contemplating, she looked at me with resolve once again. "Neither did he," she cried, jumping up and dashing for the exit behind her. I started to chase her, but she haphazardly bucked at me as she screamed for help. Spurred to action, the frosty stallion finally threw Stormwing off his back and froze one of his hoofs to the floor before dashing after her. He was definitely faster than I thought was possible on the ground, because I had to roll out of his way as he thundered by. He called out to Trixie as he passed her, his voice cold and hoarse. That pun was totally intended. Lol, cold horse.
"Trixie, retreat!"
The great and powerful Trixie does not retreat. She merely allows her opponent to live in fear of her retribution. She snarled before disappearing in another wink. The cold pony literally closed the path behind him with a wall of ice. "Come on!" I shouted, burning the ice down as Storm finally freed his hoof. "Azureflora has to escape on foot, hoof, remember? She can't be affected by magic." Silverheart and Stormwing nearly ran me over as they flew out the exit. Celestia paused to look back at Twilight. "Will you—" she started to ask before being interrupted. "Yes, I'll be fine. Hurry, this might be our last chance," Twilight protested. "I'll get back to Ponyville and get this dumb thing off my neck. Quick, go catch her." With that, we bolted out into the ruins of the courtyard as Celestia whistled loudly, calling in an airlift via the ASCA. Yes, awesome sky carriage of awesomeness. We hopped on without it ever stopping and took off after them. Shocking as it was, we actually were struggling to catch up to them. Turns out Frosty the Ice Pony was a fast flyer, despite that huge frame of his. In fact, the only reason we were able to gain ground was likely due to the fact that he was giving a lift to Azureflora. So much for traveling by hoof. I was wondering where Silverheart and Stormwing were when they suddenly shot out of a nearby cloud and team-tackled our quarry. They fought to ground him, and in the struggle Azureflora flipped loose and began to fall. I am glad Celestia was quick on the turn and had the kind soul to help her enemy, because it would have traumatized me to see anything happen to her, misguided as she was. We went in for a pass, and to my shock, Celestia had totally mismatched the catch. Once again, my gut reaction was to jump an unsafe distance to save some pony. My aim was significantly better, unfortunately, and I repeated the same trick I had done to save Luna. Luckily, the armor took the worst of the hit, but that still didn't mean it felt good. "This is becoming a terrible scene. Next pony falling gets to take one for the team," I groaned as I held onto the frightened pony. "You okay?" Yes." She was shivering, scared out of her mind. It didn't take her long to realize that she was in trouble, and with that realization in mind, she hoofed me right in my damn face before jumping up and sprinting away. Gratitude at its finest. "Trixie!" she called out. "Help!" The magician pony appeared with a puff and confidentially put herself between me and Flora. "Trixie!" I warned, seriously conflicted deep within, Laughter and Stoic waging war over whether or not to remove the silly pony as an obstacle. "Get out of the way or you will regret it." Trixie laughed, throwing back her luxurious blue mane. "You think the great and powerful Trixie would soil her hoofs fighting you foals? The idea is laughable. This negotiation was doomed from the start. But Trixie is kind and therefore she will leave you a parting gift. It's my favorite pet. Don't forget to feed it, losers." With that, Trixie's horn glowed brightly, like Twilight OP Sparkle Bright, which is extremely bright in first person. Trust me when I say that, dimming that down a whole lot in the show, because this had all of us, since Stormwing minus 10 points if you can't guess why, squinting as though Celestia had scooted the sun a few million miles closer. What came next I didn't see coming, at me at least. A black thunderous portal had appeared above us all, unbelievably large and only getting wider. I didn't think twice when I noticed something starting to come through it. I just ran. I wasn't the only smart one, since every pony made way for whatever was manifesting up in the thing. Even the battling Pegasi had broken it up to give whatever was coming plenty of space. It was big. It was purple. It was kinda glowy and transparent. It was a full-grown Ursa Major. It landed behind us as we continued to haul tail and shook the ground with an impossibly loud roar. My teeth vibrated like I had bit down on a lawnmower engine. Not that I've actually done that, I just figured it would be as intense as that, as the sheer volume caused us all to tremble involuntarily. I looked over my shoulder and chuckled nervously as I channeled a bit of Fluttershy. He's a bar! I'm sorry, I didn't want this, Sir Flora called out as she looked at us with a sad but a resigned visage, sighing remorsefully. But I must. Equestria is in danger. With that, she dumped both of her saddlebags off a manpilon and waved a hoof, creating an immense huge metal cage around us, boxing us in with the Ursa Major. Curses! Celestia spat angrily. At first I was like, curses? Really? But after thinking about it, what was she supposed to say? By my beard? Or, oh me damn it? As she tried to dispel the conjunction, how did she get so much? Azure Flora gazed at us sadly. It was obvious she did not enjoy these drastic measures, that sure of hell didn't make me like her any more at the moment, but for her credit, she was not taking any pleasure in this. Trixie laughed, poofing away as the icy Pegasus flew off with Azure in tow. Typical villains. Just assume your traps defeated the hero. To their credit, however, I sugar wasn't betting on our survival either. Great, so we're in a box with a bear big enough to beat an ancient dragon into the dirt. No, I'm not cool with this, I said offhand, shaking my head in frustration. So we just gotta trash the 200-foot-tall bear, and then we'll have all the time we need to figure this out, right? Stormwing, you get on that. Silverheart, hold me as I whimper. Silverheart didn't hold me. She hit me in the shoulder instead. I wasn't comforted by that in the least, however. In fact, I was hurt. Not just my feelings either. She's got quite the arm. Leg? Hoof? Whatever. Shut up, she said, quite simply as the Ursa began making its way to us. She was right, naturally. I just faced my fears with nonchalance to trick myself into not freaking out. A small voice inside was telling me that this was a perfect justifiable freak-out moment, and another part of me was agreeing with it. Just to paint this little scene, we were 4 ponies trapped in a cage about the size of the Colosseum in Rome with an ill-tempered Ursa Major. The comparison in size alone was staggering, as I was able to see just the barest hint of atmospheric fade. Shadow of the Colossus did not prepare me for this in the least. It was like 4 little frogs versus a fully grown adult man. Don't throw your money on the frogs, right? Just a thought. This is where a commercial would go if this were an episode, but much to my displeasure, though, this was actually happening.
What do we do, Princess? Stormwing asked, his mane and hoofs starting to crackle with power. Silverheart swallowed a bit, obviously intimidated, but still holding her cool. I did what I do best. Light a cigarette and play it cool. Cool involving getting ready to wrap a blindfold around my eyes so I don't tense up too much. Celestia glared at the cage, then back at the Ursa Major, before uttering the most unlikely words I'd ever heard from the pony princess. We fight. Buy me as much time as you can, ponies. Just be safe. All hesitation and second thoughts were instantly dispelled. I looked at Silverheart and Stormwing, both of which nodded and began to paw at the ground before charging the incredibly huge bear. I looked back at her, smirking as I resigned myself to what I figured would probably be my last day as a pony. Then I took off as well, snorting flame and kicking up fiery chunks of dirt in my wake. Best week ever! I screamed like a lunatic as we began to close distance. It wasn't going to take very long, mostly because anything that size can haul big bear butt when it wants to.
Stormwing took off into the sky, falling back as Silverheart slipped in front, taking flight ahead of him. Ever see two Sky Archons work in tandem? Okay, stupid question. Ever imagine what two Pegasi could do when working in tandem? I have. I was grossly underestimating their potential. Silverheart stopped advancing as Stormwing took to higher altitudes. She began to loop rapidly, swirling the air about betwixt Stormwing and the Ursa, which was still getting dangerously close to us. I wasn't sure what they were going for, but I didn't like the fact that the Ursa was raising a paw to swat Silverheart out of the sky. So I stopped just under her and inhaled. When I say inhaled, I mean I burned nearly an inch of my cigarette, sucking in as much air as I could hold. Just before it could swing, I let loose enough fire that it yanked its paw back, quite cinched. That little escapade took a lot out of me. The second worst part? I'd received worse burns from Roman candles in comparison. The absolute worst part? The damage seemed to fade away after a few seconds. Yay, I'm helping! I laughed sadly at how much effort it had cost for a temporary annoyance at best. Fact was, I was actually helping a lot. I just didn't know it at the time. When Stormwing finally got enough altitude, he turned and began to dive at Silverheart, whom had actually been forming a storm cloud. A small, concentrated, thundering little beast of a cloud. It shot lightning and everything. Craziest thing I'd ever seen? Not by a long shot, but still quite mind-blowing. "Get him, Storm!" Silverheart cheered as she veered off at the last second, releasing the cloud. Stormwing punched straight through it and sucked up every last bit of that lightning and thunder, ripping it right off the cloud and dragging it with him. I've been to concerts that wish they were as loud as the impact between Stormwing and the Ursa Major. I actually had to clamp my hooves over my ears to avoid being deafened. He connected with it right in the shoulder, literally knocking it back and into the air for just half a second. Bears are not used to getting knocked around, thus I can assume that Ursa Majors experience such sensations with even less frequency. It roared and thrashed for a moment as the electricity coursed throughout it, before shaking its head, somewhat dumbfounded that it had just been booted into the air by such a small opponent. "That should have put it down!" Silverheart protested, not believing her eyes. "It's magically protected." Celestia's eyes were shut as her horn flashed over and over. "I'm still trying to dispel them all." Now, I'm not an incredibly fair fighter. I mean, when it gets to fights, it's not for fun. It's because something huge is on the line and it's gone far enough that I'm willing to do whatever it takes for that something. Celestia's life? Silverheart's life? My life? Those were important, oh yeah, and that other jack pony. What I'm getting at was that I wasn't going to sit around and wait for it to get back up as a go-ahead to attack. I just galloped up and started roaring fire at whatever part I could reach. Ursa Major's response? Roll over on me. You have no idea how incredibly stupid I felt as that stupid bear's butt began to roll my way, going way faster than anything I could have done to escape. So I decided against escaping and tried to fight the tide of purple starry fur rolling my way by rearing up and slamming down, creating a pillar of fire around myself. Remember that whole expect it and you get it trick? Yeah, I owe Luna so much for that. It brushed against the pillar before roaring again and throwing itself in the other direction. Stormwing and Silverheart began to roll up another stormy silver combo thing when the bear finally got back to its feet and spotted them. It wasn't going to make it in time to stop them, so it just decided to scrape up a paw full of dirt. To us it was like ripping up a small hill and chucking it at Silverheart, who barely managed to dodge the worst of it. A bit of debris caught her in the wing, however, and she went down, roughly skidding along to a halt, crying out upon impact. "Combo breaker! Bad taste, I know." "Man, just go away!" I shouted, before breathing fire at its foot, causing it to roar angrily before turning at me in earnest. I tried to stomp on my sorry blood, but I just burned that foot, too. I didn't know what else to do, and I'll be damned if it didn't work. Stormwing collided with its face, though without the storm cloud it wasn't nearly as effective. It roared and swatted at him a few times, driving him away as I spat a fireball. Expected, ole, I expect you to disappear, Ursa Major. No, that didn't work, sadly, at its face. Finally, Celestia cried out triumphantly as she shot a ray from her horn at the Ursa Major. It hit, like you could possibly miss something that size, it right in the nose, and as soon as it did, the Ursa Major changed just a bit. It grew armor. Not just any armor, but very specific armor. I'd seen this armor actually, and very recently, as a matter of fact. It was the same armor that Nightmare Moon had worn, sans the horn in the helmet. The Ursa is being controlled by the Nightmare, Celestia explained, teleporting to my side. It's not a pony, so this has to be a spell. We just have to overcome its magic. Celestia tried firing another ray, but a purple mist crept forth from within the Ursa and struck the spell away. Now, I kinda got that Ushi feeling when she said Ursa controlled by Nightmare going down all over me. I kinda broke into a cold sweat even, but it was quickly replaced by more feelings of awesome as I realized something. The anti-magic crap! I pointed to the bars behind the bear. Indeed. She was thinking of the same thing, the Inmanpylon. Storm! I yelled up at him. When he didn't immediately give us his attention, I spat a couple of small fireballs at him to get him. He didn't think that was funny, but at least he looked our way.
What are you doing, fool? Aim at the armor-clad bear! He scolded me.
I hated the name, but apparently I had to use it. The stupid Inmanpylon! Push the bear into it!
And how are we going to do that, genius? He shouted back. Silverheart is down.
Ask it nicely? I shrugged. Damn it, Fluttershy, why aren't you here when we have a giant monster that needs to get its face told in? I have an idea. Firewall, why don't you breathe some more fire? Celestia said with a smirk. Her horn began to glow. I'll see what I can do to help. I watched in confusion as a line of magic lazily drifted from her horn to mine. Then I felt a surge throughout my entire body all at once. I don't think there are words for what Celestia was doing to me. You said out of context, and you may be beaten and then handed to the masses. It was like I had been plugged into a nuclear generator. Ever seen Meet the Medic? Yeah, there was no way they could have made it look this awesome. I could feel fire flowing from every inch of my body, and it was only getting hotter. It was a rush like no other, indescribable to be certain. My hoofs were white with heat, my entire coat and mane were blazing like the sun, and the best part was it didn't even burn my cigarette. I looked at the bear and considered saying something snarky just to be goofy about the entire ordeal, but I just settled for spitting out the Marlboro and roaring out the largest inferno one could possibly imagine. The Ursa had to be at least half a mile away, but it made no difference because its body was not ready. The Nightmare Ursa roared in protest as the flames washed over it. It stumbled back, badly singed all over as I began to pant heavily, stopping only to take another breath. The air was shimmering from the residual heat wave, still left over from the last breath, and as though it could see it staring at me angrily, this time ready to dodge. I hesitated, unsure if I should take an uncertain shot, especially when the first had left me so light-headed. Stormwing was on top of it, though, flying up to lightning bash it in the nose with a quick pass, distracting it just long enough for me to tag it with another staggering wave of flame. I heard Celestia gasp a bit. This was taking its toll on her, especially within this cage. I could relate. I was barely able to stand after that second one. I even saw those silly little sparkles that let you know you're about to pass out. One more, princess, I promised, my voice somewhat unstable and melodic with all the power coursing through me. It was obvious that such a small body was not designed to act as a conduit for so much power. The fatigue wasn't even in my body, it was more as though my will had been drained. As many as it takes, Firewall, she answered, her voice still strong. Do not stop. I didn't respond. In all actuality, I wasn't certain I could do one more, much more less anything more than that. Taking another deep breath, I spread the volley out a bit to push the Ursa back one more time, putting everything I had left into it. I could tell it wasn't as strong as the last one, and to my dismay, it wasn't enough. Its back brushed against the cage a bit, causing it to convulse a bit as the spell flattered somewhat. I then inhaled as hard as I could, knowing that I had to try harder than I ever had. My lungs were aching from so much air. I'm sure smoking had nothing to do with it. Filling them as I began to let it all out. Just before I did, I discovered that I couldn't go through with it after all. I was quaking all over just from trying to stay standing. I began to cough violently and fell to my knees. "I'm so... Princess," I gasped in out between breaths, my eyes watering as my body ached all over. "You did your best," she assured me before taking flight towards the Ursa, shining like a star as she accelerated. The Ursa began to move, but Stormwing was there again, like a bad penny, disorientating it by clapping thunder by its ears and striking amongst the face. It was like watching a fly beat a man about the head and shoulders with a small tack hammer in terms of effectiveness. Celestia took the opportunity to crash into the corrupted monster's chest, knocking it back that last bit. The Ursa collided with the cage, causing it to rip up out of the ground behind me as it fell over. The effect was instant, nearly, with an explosive reaction that thrust the nightmare out of its host. The Ursa lost consciousness as the nightmare was forced from its body, causing the vaporous fiend to scream in pain and fury. I smiled tiredly, grinning in triumph as I put more weight onto my knees. Those are knees, right? Ponies have knees, and not some obscure jargon for their leg joints, yes? "There it is, Stormwing! Arrest that cloud!" I chuckled as I shook my head, trying to clear the adrenaline and fatigue out. I was just so tired after all of that, and I wasn't the only one. Celestia flew back lazily, landing with a shaky canter as she panted even harder than I was. We could barely stand up, we were so exhausted. I'm pretty sure the victory rush was the only thing keeping me awake. "Not bad," she gave me a tired chuckle. "No, kidding. Eat your heart out, Trixie. We vanquished the dreaded Ursa Major." I laughed a bit before falling over, fading in and out of consciousness. "Beat that!"
"Look out!"
I heard Stormwing cry out at us. "This isn't over, beast!" I heard the furious, disembodied voice of the nightmare echo as I felt the rush of air blowing over me. And I was suddenly wide awake again, scrambling to my hoofs as I heard Celestia gasp in shock. The nightmare had her. "No!" I shouted as I turned back towards her and leaped back. Celestia was trying her best to fight it off, but I could tell in her weakened state that wasn't going to happen without help. "Celestia!"
"Princess!"
I heard Stormwing shout as he dived down at us. "No!
Get away from her!"
Stormwing was just too far away, but I had a chance. The nightmare lifted her from the ground, and my horror was absolute when I failed to grab hold. My hoof actually nicked hers, the margin was so small. I felt sick as I jumped again, knowing there was no way I could have closed the widening distance. It was the single most difficult thing I'd ever had to watch. I thought I had known fear when Rainbow Dash was being stolen from me. I thought I was afraid when I had faced down an Ursa Major with just 3 other ponies. But for the first time since being in Equestria, the sensation of absolute terror took hold and gripped me from within. "At least I am victorious!" The nightmare laughed in total glee as more of its misty form vanished into the alicorn. "Equestria is mine!" The skies began to shift colors as the sun changed from a warm, beautiful yellow to a threatening dark red. Clouds swirled and formed, thundering loudly within an instant as rain and torrential winds surged forth. The armor appeared gold and razor-sharp on Celestia's form, adorning her hoofs, neck, crown, and wings. Her multi-hued mane and tail shifted and swung low, becoming blood-red. She gave one final cry as she lost the battle to the nightmare.
"Celestia!"
Storm screamed in futility, making a straight line for her. "No!" Their voices mix harmoniously, chilling my blood. Celestia is no longer. I am Nightmare Soul, ruler of Equestria, and you, son of Stormwinter, are my subject.
Never!
He shouted as he closed the last bit of distance, only to be struck away with a wink of her magic. This isn't funny anymore, I murmured softly, swallowing the horrible truth that floated down before me. On the contrary, she replied with a small chuckle, turning to my face. I've never felt like laughing so much in my entire existence. Okay, every pony, I hope you saw why I had to reread Chapter 7, and there are actually a few things different from the Chapter 7 I had already up. This is because this is the unrevised version of Through the Eyes of Another Pony Chapter 7. If you don't believe me, go to Equestria Daily and check for yourself. I myself actually can't wait for the revised version, because this one, oh my god, he's acting more silly than in the revised version here, and I think that's, oh my god. Okay, that said, sincerely yours, Visual Pony.